And the section I got to chair was entitled "The Jewish Dimension of a Permanent Agreement," and was really the geopolitical section. We had about 35 people in that section, and we talked to 4 principal areas. We talked Jewish-Islamic relations, Jerusalem, settlements, and the diaspora role in decision-making. And what we did, we didn't talk about the issues of whether there's going to be a settlement freeze this week, or whether the Netanyahu government is going to do this in the next 3 weeks, or whether the Obama administration is going to do that in the next 4 weeks, or exactly what Abbas is going to say or what Fayyad is going to say. What we really tried to do was step back and look at the broader issues, recognizing there's a peace process going on, recognizing that all of us would like to see, I think it's fair to say, almost everybody in our room wanted to see a two-state solution, wanted to see a Jewish state and a Palestinian state living side by side. What does all that mean? Where is it going to go? How do we see whether we can get that done over a broader period? And so what I'm going to describe, this is the report that I gave at the end of the conference to the broader group. There were about 150 people at the conference. Our group was about 35 people. Our group had everything our section had everything from Danny Dayan, who is the head of the settler movement, to Amiai Alon, who wrote the Geneva Accords. He went blocked for the moment, but he wrote he was the Israeli interlocutor on the Accords. We had the two most recent U.S. ambassadors to Israel. We had the 2 most recent Israeli ambassadors to the United States. We had Elliot Abrams, who was George Bush's guru on Middle East policy, and we really had a terrifically wide group of thinkers. And we concluded there were 2 overriding points in which we reached consensus. These may not be profound, but they are something that I think doesn't get mentioned every day in the newspaper. The first is just to focus on the fact that if there is a permanent agreement, what's called a permanent agreement, it is not the end of the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians, Israel and the Arab world, Jews and Muslims. It is maybe the beginning of a new phase of that relationship. And there will be a morning after. And we need to think about what that morning after will look like and what we can do to make sure that the morning after is better than the day before. I think if you think about that, that's an obvious point, but it's not one that you read about in the papers very often. Usually the point is, there'll be a peace treaty. If there's a peace treaty, terrific. There's a peace treaty and everybody embraces and goes on in life, and it'll be wonderful. Maybe. But I think we need to understand that there is a morning after and what that morning after looks like. The second kind of overriding point we agreed upon was that the diaspora and the state of Israel have important and interwoven relationships. Israel is Netanyahu has now put on the table this question of Israel being a Jewish state. What does that mean? Is it a Jewish state, or is it a homeland for the Jewish people? A formulation, I think, that many are much more comfortable with, many Jews are much more comfortable with than Netanyahu's formulation of a Jewish state. But it's an important, and I'll talk some more about that. But that relationship is changing. We are now at a point where more than 50% of the Jews in the world live in Israel, and so we need to understand a bit better what that relationship is. As I said, we had four separate sessions we dealt with. One was Jewish-Islamic relations and the final status agreement. And in that, the question was, is an Israeli-Palestinian agreement, can that bring reconciliation with the Muslim world? Can that bring reconciliation between the Jewish world and the Muslim world? And the view, I think articulated by many, and I hesitate to say consensus, but the view articulated by many was that there's a battle going on within Islam between moderate Islam and radical Islams. It either started or was dramatically accelerated in 1977 by the Iranian Revolution, and that battle is that battle between moderate and radical Islam is probably not going to end until the Iranian regime is changed in one way or another, whether internally in Iran or externally. That it is in the best interest of the U.S. and Israel and the West generally to strengthen the moderates as best they can. A peace treaty would do that, but there was a lot of debate about whether it's possible to have a peace treaty while that debate in the Muslim world goes on. Again, I come back to that morning after question. What does it look like if a treaty gets signed tomorrow and the next day Iran does what it's undoubtedly going to do, which is be very vocal about its criticism of that, accuse Abbas and Fayyad of being traitors, probably unleash Hezbollah and Hamas in some way to take physical actions, which Israel will respond to in some way, which the world will probably criticize Israel for responding to in some way. And so, is it possible to have a peace treaty while that battle within Islam continues? Recognizing would be desirable in the sense that it would undoubtedly help the moderates in that battle. Second kind of point on which there was discussion is that we can't ignore the role of religion in this conflict. That religion has played a greater and greater role in this conflict over the last 40 years. Sadat and Rabin were both assassinated by religious fanatics who kind of objected to a peace treaty or any accommodation on religious grounds, and that has only that passion, the religious passion, has only gotten more involved since then, not less. And so you need to understand that it's not just a political dispute. The next point, which I think is quite an interesting one, is that the whole Arab world, or at least the moderate Arab world, needs to be part of a peace agreement. The view is, and this is again maybe not conventional wisdom, but I think if you think about it, it's fairly obvious. The Palestinians cannot deliver Israel enough. They can't deliver enough to Israel to make it worth Israel's while to sign an agreement. That is as somebody put it, the goal for the Israelis has to be a Saudi embassy in Jerusalem. And if you sign a peace treaty with the Palestinians and you make whatever concessions you need to make, and some of those concessions, removal of a bunch of settlers, splitting Jerusalem in some way, those will be painful decisions within Israel. And if those concessions are made, they need to be in the context of a peace arrangement. That doesn't mean every Arab country has to sign on the line, but a peace arrangement that has the support of the rest of the Arab world. For example, the Saudis view themselves as the Muslim custodian of the holy places within Jerusalem. And whatever deal Netanyahu and Abbas strike, if they strike one, better be satisfactory to the Saudis if one wants the Saudis to be supportive. And so in a sense, Israel really needs to be negotiating not just with the Israelis. It needs to be negotiating, not just with the Palestinians. It needs to be negotiating with the entire Arab League through the Palestinians. In some sense, it is. I mean, I think some of the actions of the Arab League recently, have been constructive, and I think all of us, everywhere, should understand that the Arab world has come a long way from Khartoum. I mean, Khartoum was the conference at the end of 1967, after the 1967 war, that said no negotiation, no peace, no treaties, no recognition. And the Arab League actions and you know, I can be the first to be critical of some of the points in their responses, but it's very, very different than where we were at Khartoum. But one should not dismiss at all the fact that the Arab League needs to be, from an Israeli perspective, more than the Palestinian perspective, from an Israeli perspective, needs to be a participant in that negotiation. And whatever peace treaty is signed with the Palestinians, better have for Israel the next day recognition from Saudi Arabia, recognition from the UAE, recognition from the other Gulf states if it's going to deliver Israel what Israel needs out of a peace treaty. We talked about, I'm not sure we shed any light on the issue of how you get Hamas to the table. When do you talk to them? How do you talk to them? How do you get them involved? And you know, some in our room said, it's nuts, we should be talking to them right now, and others said, all you can do is wait till Hamas falls under its own weight